Hey guys, it's Penelope in London. You probably know that if you follow me, my channel. If not, then please like and subscribe. I talk about astrology from an evolutionary point of view. And the other thing I talk about as well is trauma. I'm quite well read on it. So you see this book here. It's called Trauma and Recovery, and it's by a lady called Judith Herman. And I've heard about her through somebody called Pete Walker, complex PTSD from surviving to thriving, through my searching, trying to understand myself. And she's got a particular chapter here, chapter 3, and it's I'm going to read literally just this section. So I'm not going to read the whole book. This is a short video with any luck. I am a Gemini, so sometimes I elaborate and elaborate. So I want to talk about terror from this section here, because I think that what I'm seeing currently is that a lot of us feel, extreme anxiety, and it can be terrifying. And when we've had childhood trauma, we can have a hangover from that. And with a lot of what's going on now, people who've had trauma, which is many, many, many people, are flashing back to early events of parental care where they had no control over the situation. And it can be a very difficult time for people at this time. So let's read a bit of this, and then I'm going to give you some tips. And also in regard to the astrology, if you do follow me on my astrology, I will explain something over the next few days. I'm going to look at the Uranian energy that's going on Uranus. And also I will be looking at Saturn, because that's restriction, which would be the parental government control. And then Uranus, which is breaking free of limitations. And in a way, when we look at trauma, we've got the parental or, authority that from childhood trauma. And then we have, and in any trauma, actually, you'll see when I read this bit of this book, how that equates. And then we've got the breaking free of limitations. And the limitations are also breaking free of the limitations of trauma so that we get to live a better life. It's not about, Pete Walker in his book mentions, it's not about being all or nothing, because the problem with thinking that we're going to be fully healed one day, like magical thinking, means that when we fall back, we really hit bottom, and the inner critic kicks in and tells us how stupid we are and how there's something wrong with us. And we want to stop doing that. So we want to stop the inner critic. So there you go. So I'm going to start reading a bit of this book and see where this goes. So psychological trauma is an affliction of the powerless. So psychological trauma is generally carried out by people who are powerless and they want to have power. Okay, this is generally true. At the moment of trauma, the victim is rendered helpless by an overwhelming force. So there's a force, of somebody overpowering us. And when the force is that of nature, we speak of disasters. So we know, if there's an earthquake or there's a, volcanic eruption, it's or what we've seen this week in America as well. We can see that those disasters, are very traumatic and nature. So when the force is that of another human being, we speak of atrocities. So as an example, we could look at Hitler and the atrocities of the world wars as an example, and currently as well, what's going on in the world. Traumatic events overwhelm the ordinary systems of care that give people a sense of control, connection, and meaning. So we can also see this currently. I'm sorry, I keep taking my glasses off, but this is a habit I have. So we can see this currently with when we look at the current situation we're in with our health and viruses, and trying to understand it and trying to work out what's right and who's telling the truth, and the media and all of these different things coming at us. So it's causing a lot of anxiety for a lot of people. So if you are having anxiety, know that you're not alone. This is, people may not really speak about it, but people are very anxious. So she continues to say, it was once believed that such events were uncommon. In 1980, when post-traumatic stress disorder was first included in the diagnostic manual, the American Psychiatric Association described traumatic events as outside of the range of usual human experience. But sadly, this definition has proved to be inaccurate. She goes on to say, rape and battery are other forms of and sexual and domestic violence are so common a part of women's lives, that they can hardly be described as outside the range of ordinary experience. And in view of the number of people killed in war over the past century, military trauma too must be considered a common part of human experience. Only the fortunate find it unusual. So, you know, when we think about this, we flip on the news or we hear the news and we see people at war, and it's not really shocking to us. You know, it's going to be more shocking for the people in the middle of it and that are experiencing it. But we see this happen in countries, and we're not that shocked. We can actually, you know, turn a blind eye if we're not in the middle of it and just not really consider what people are going through. And that's not to guilt trip. This is just, you know, an observation I'm making. It's no guilting, you know, people do what they do. Traumatic events are extraordinary not because they occur rarely, but rather because they overwhelm the ordinary human adaptations of life. Unlike commonplace misfortunes, traumatic events generally involve threats to life or bodily integrity or close personal encounter with violence and deaths. They confront human beings with the extremities of helplessness and terror and evoke the response of catastrophe. So, or she also says, according to the comprehensive textbook of psychiatry, the uncommon denominator of psychological trauma is a feeling of intense fear, helplessness, loss of control, and threat of annihilation. So I really think that we are, right now, there are so many people that are traumatized that are not being able to go and get help. So one thing I do for ladies, I've got a ladies group on meetup.com. I'm going to show you. I'm going to share my screen. So you see this here. If you're female, and I'm, you know, for any male guy, for the guys watching, I'm sorry that I don't do one for gentlemen, and hopefully there are groups out there for guys, but because of my own trauma it was very much female, you know, it was to do with the feminine with myself, and it's what I know and the wisdom that I have, I stuck with helping females. But, you know, there are books that you can read, and there are also groups on Facebook for the guys if you're watching this and you need support. There's also this book here, which is Pete Walker, Complex PTSD from Surviving to Thriving, Pete Walker. So do get this book, because I'm going to refer to this one in a minute, and it's really helpful to understand what trauma is and what complex PTSD is. Because PTSD is generally a one-off event, but I think it came from the word shell shock when people came back from war. Then it was called complex PTSD, complexes, and some of these memories cannot be recalled from our childhood, but the body reacts in certain ways, and we, you know, suffer. And the whole point is through knowledge, which I do. The point would be to get to a point where we alleviate the suffering and we get the wisdom and knowledge to understand, so that we're not living in pain or recreating patterns anymore that we were taught, and we make better choices. So on Wednesdays, I did one today, you can see here, Heal Your Inner Child, which is talking about the Pete Walker work and trauma, and this book. I brought up this book today in that group. And then here, I've got healing codependency, which is really important, because we're not just codependent upon our intimate relationships. Codependency is with, you know, it just covers a wide range of circumstances and people. We can be with friends, it can be codependency with family, and it can also be codependency with regard to governments as well, you know, relying on governments. Let's say that you've got issues where you're, well, like now, where we're having to be, you know, there's a codependent type thing going on, where we're, you know, expecting people, not expecting, but we're trying to figure out what to do. And some people are unable to work, so they're relying on the government for universal credit or stuff like that for the first time in their life. That's in the UK. I don't know what you call it in the USA, but where, you know, you get a small amount of money each week or whatever to live, and you might have a family, and that could be really traumatizing as well for people, that they've, you know, haven't got the work that they had. and or to be able to buy the foods and things that they love to do. And then on top of that, we've got something else going on where we can't go where we want to go either. So not easy times. So as we all know, so the severity of traumatic events cannot be measured on any single dimension. Simplistic efforts to quantify trauma ultimately lead to meaningless comparison of horror. Nevertheless, certain identifiable experiences increase the likelihood of harm. These include being taken by surprise, trapped to exposed to the point of exhaustion. The likelihood of harm is also increased when the traumatic event includes physical violation, or injury, exposure to extreme violence, or witnessing grotesque death. In each instance, the salient characteristic of the traumatic event in its power to inspire helplessness and terror. So this really related to me today. I'm not related, I related to it today when I read that bit, because with what's going on in the world, you know, like for many can have anxiety that's off the scale. So now what I'm going to do is show you this book, and this is chapter 9 from Pete Walker, Complex PTSD from Surviving to Thriving. And this is Shrinking the Inner Critic. So in order to begin to deal with our flashbacks, which is emotional flashbacks, which is really important as well, which are the memories that freak us out now, which cause behaviors that we no longer need to use and keep us in that pain. We don't just do one thing, we'd also look at shrinking the inner critic. And Pete Walker generally says that we need to get rid of that parental voice of judgment and guilt and control. And we need to understand that that inner voice was taught us, and we need to unlearn it. And one way of unlearning it is knocking the inner critic out of the way. So when that inner critic voice comes up, and you might hear it play out and berate you, and you want to start dealing with that as soon as you can. And, you know, don't become very aware what that inner voice is doing. The fear voice, the fear, the shaming, toxic shaming yourself, telling yourself that you're no good, that that you're worthless, that there's something wrong with you physically and stuff like that. You really want to work on that stuff to get it to a point of understanding that this inner critic can be, dealt with, and you can master it. I've managed to do it. I mean, no one's going to be 100% perfect at it, so it's not a competition. But the more you do it, the more you tell it to bugger off. If somebody was in your ears telling you constantly, and berating you and telling you there's something wrong with you, eventually you would knock them out of the way. So we have to stop doing that to ourselves. And he basically, I'll just read a little bit from here. He says the flashback inducing critic, so the flashbacks will induce us into this critic, is typically spawned in a danger-ridden childhood home. And this is true whether the dangers come from the passive abandonment of neglect of the active abandonment of abuse. When parents do not provide safe enough bonding and positive feedback, the child flounders in anxiety and fear. Many children appear to be hardwired to adapt to this endangering abandonment with perfectionism. So this means we become this perfect human being in order to be accepted by society. And we don't speak our truth, and we don't stand up for ourselves, and we think we've got to follow along what everybody else believes and thinks because they're in power or whatever. So we can see how we're in a very traumatic situation at the moment. And I'm hoping that people out there, if you are suffering, do go and get help. You don't want to be speaking to people. You can speak to, we've all got friends, but for instance, I'll have some friends, if I bring up something from my traumatic past, they'll say, oh, let it go. Or they'll either say, let it go, or, maybe one day you'll be able to forgive. And they're so useless. When you're in the middle of a traumatic flashback, the last thing you want to hear is somebody telling you to let it go, and as if you just like flip a switch and just let it go. When we're having flashbacks or we're having anxiety or fear or nightmares or stuff like that, we need somebody who's going to listen to us and hold space without shoulding us and telling us what to do. So the other thing I thought, so that's my group, by the way. And what I'm going to do is go back to this. And this is quite apt, right? So in the healing, we want to give ourselves time, give yourself time. There's no race to healing. And it's not all or nothing. You have good days, bad days. Think of a little baby. It will like cry. And Richard Brannon, actually, if you do follow him, if you're into the complex PTSD, and he speaks of similar stuff. I've watched him over the years as well, a brilliant guy on trauma on YouTube. If you listen to him, he was on a video the other day and he said that there are three things, see if I find it on my phone. There are three things that a child does, which I thought was brilliant. He brought it up. I'm just looking on my Facebook page to recall it because it was really, really good. So let me see. I'm also on Facebook. I'm on Instagram as well, so you know. So let me see where he said, because it was great. So on trauma, where are we? Okay. Will I find it? So a child will say, it's mine, and that's it. A child will say, when you're 2 or 3, you go, I want that. And you'll say, it's mine. And you'll go, no. Now, some of us didn't have the ability to be able to do that. If the abuse started really early on, we have what's called arrested development to a degree. It's where we've not been able to give that no, I'm not doing that, and that's mine, yeah. And also I want, because we've basically been squashed. Our personality was not allowed to develop properly. So, you need to practice where no is appropriate for you and say no to people, have some healthy boundaries. Doesn't mean you oust people, but it means that if somebody's not good for you and they're toxic, you begin to be able to say no. You don't have to engage. I want, think about what you want for yourself. My wants have changed with all of this, pandemic. I know what I want and I'm working towards that now. And what's yours is yours. So it's mine, whether it's your body, whether it's your, something personal, whether it's your money, what's yours is yours. And that's okay too. You don't be guilt tripping yourself over what you believe is your sovereign right to yourself and your resources. So I'm going to leave it there for today. I'm going to do some videos on astrology over the next couple of days. I've got a friend I'm inviting to my YouTube channel tomorrow to look at some astrology, and also not her astrology, but general, the Uranian energy we're going to look at. And then we've got a new moon coming up as well. So I know this is mixed in with trauma, but it equates to me because when we look at the symbolism of trauma, the symbolism of trauma in the chart, which is the Uranian energy, it's plutonic, all of the planets have an element of the traumatic side and then the higher octave of where we're powerful. And it's a beautiful way to understand ourselves as well. Okay, I'll leave it there and I'll be back tomorrow. That's the plan. Catch you later, and thanks for watching. Catch you later.